Hello, Juice County. We are back. Ha ha.
Ha!
Yeah.
Yup.
The homie Dylan.
Live.
Live. We're doing it live.
No editing.
Doing it live.
There is an AI filter on top of it that will beautify my appearance, but yeah, it's all live, baby.
Yeah. I mean, your job is very quickly going to be taken over by AI. You know.
Yeah. Most of it already has. I mean, as the
my home
viewers are seeing it tonight. Yes.
Oh man.
Thank God.
Thank you so much for joining us here today. It's Jose, Dylan Thompson.
Oh, yeah.
We are here with a fantabulous, amazing show tonight. We have the one and only Fernando Deveras that's going to be joining us today. It's happening is in full effect. Yeah, and it's been a trying time for America, for people in America, for people suffering the effects of America all over the world. It's been a dark period in our history, and like the history books will show it. But through it all, there's been just a lot of shining examples of resilience and empowerment, and the ability to like really come together and form a unified front, to tackle on all these things that are hitting us, all day, every day. But it's nonstop, really, right?
Yeah, it's been bad.
Yeah, so we're definitely. As we are, being comical and humorous about the things that are happening, it's part of our sanity, right? And the other day we went to this fundraiser for now NDLON, National Day Laborers Organization. It's an amazing network. Been working with day laborers for many years, and there was a fundraiser at La Santa, and we were able to raise almost $10,000. And part of what I've been reading and what I've been seeing is, and what I brought, as the MC of that day is, just to remember that joy is resistance, and that as we are facing such, troubling moments, where you're frustrated, you're angry, you're sad, and you're just like, what the heck is happening right now? You have to find that moment, to spend time with your loved ones and to find joy and happiness, like spend time with your friends, sing karaoke like you did with our homie Ruben the other day. So, it's a part of that. So yeah. I do want to shout out before I get into everything, that new song that you heard at the beginning, that's from Moises and his group Los Sonicos, I believe. So yeah, shout out to Moises, Los Sonicos. They performed at the show on Wednesday. They rocked the house. I mean, there was just a lot of really cool talent. We had a DMAR, we had a DJ Kaboom, who we have it on the show in due time. And we had, of course, the Valley Rats, local, up and coming badasses. So yeah, shout out to all the people that showed up there and donated. You're part of what is going to allow people to stay home and not put themselves at risk. That when we're having these agents out there terrorizing our community. So, but before we get into all that, I want to definitely. Just share that the Iran and Israel situation has been fluctuating right in the past couple weeks, but according to Trump, we're okay. Ceasefire, peace.
There'll be peace through strength. Yeah.
There will be peace in the Middle East. We shall bomb you first, but then you will come begging for peace. Yeah, so it's just absolutely horrendous. And what I love the most about it is the silver lining is that the right is starting to to show fray at the edges and show that there is discord and not all aboard for Trump. Although many that first spoke out from the MAGA movement were quick to be like, well, I don't know if this is the best way, but I trust the president's doing the right thing, which of course it's a cult, so they have to get beaten into formation if they stray too much from that. But we dropped some bunker busters, right? Trump claimed that they completely annihilated the nuclear program. People, smarter people, assessing the situation say that he hasn't, because they've moved a lot of material, and so that's we could drop bombs all day, and Iraq and Afghanistan show us we can decimate whole cities and stuff, but the resistance can and does continue in all sorts of ways. So it is not going to be anywhere as easy as he is claiming it to be. Neither is an attempted ceasefire. So, Iran has already come out and saying that, we don't know what this brother's talking about. We have never agreed to any.
This just started. What are you talking about?
Such things. We are just.
You just bombed us.
You just bombed us, But, Iran did attempt to bomb a U.S. base in Qatar. And part of like the whole, theater of war is that Iran many times when it's gonna throw bombs or missiles, they'll be like, "Hey, y'all, we're gonna do this," but just because we can't look like we're weak in front of our people, yo,
You guys can clear out.
yeah, just so like,
They'll
just know,
destroy
they'll burst them in the sky, but like at least they can be like, we rock them because blah blah blah. So war is a racket, and in all ways, there's some, of course, folks that are fighting for their literal existence, and other folks that are, kind of more the perpetrators, but in the end, it's a lot of saber rattling and posturing, and but people, innocent people are getting hurt and will get hurt if this continues. So we really hope that does not. But I wanted to bring that up, and there's just so much that is happening in a short amount of time, right? The two Democrats that were killed by a man pretending to be a police officer, like with a mask and stuff, and just kind of really worries me in a moment when you're seeing hooded people like pretending to be law enforcement going out, and like what if cartels get some ideas about how they can human smuggle and traffic, or disappear people, like, and this is already, we've seen it, copycat type of situations, but that got swept right under the of the rug. But I'm like, if that would have been a Republican and like a leftist like that, took out a couple of Republicans, like Fox News would have been on loop talking about how the left is unhinged, and like we need to attack these terrorists on the left and this and that. So the fact that just got buried under just shows just how like the news cycle is continuously just getting switched from it's like it's
Moving on.
it's like ADHD style type of like stuff, like yeah.
Well,
So
to be fair, there is a lot of distracting news domestically and abroad, especially what's happening with Iran and stuff. I did want to point out like that we struck the nuclear sites that Israel had attacked, right? But when we kind of, our narrative is like, oh, we're just trying to prevent Iran from getting their weapons. Like, it's kind of like, oh yeah, but it benefits Israel. Oh yeah, they're not emphasizing that part, but I feel like it's the same thing when they were fighting the Houthis. They're just like, oh yeah, no, we got to protect trade in the region. Nothing to do with Israel. It's kind of like, but it's like, wait, that's their entire agenda. So it's like, they're always like, who's running the military decisions here? It looks like Israel is, because like we're just following their lead. And yeah, I mean, other thing I thought was interesting was that the stock market went up a little bit today because after the bombing of the base in Qatar, because the market's optimistic that this will be the end of it and World War III won't happen. I hope they're right, but we're still on the brink of it. There's no sign. There's no ceasefire. That's just Trump saying that, right? That's maybe that's what he wants for the economy to recover a little bit, but. There's no Israel is still being bombed in Tel Aviv by Iran, and also that conflict is still raging. So we're kind of still on an unknown position. Like, it's unclear what's going to happen. You can't trust anything any of these presidents are going to say. They just say whatever needs to be said at any given point. They always want to go into Iran. So there's a huge neocon. Like, this is a dream that neocons have had for many decades, right? And we're kind of on the cusp of it still. So it's a very dynamic situation.
Yeah, and you got evangelical end timers like Huckabee, that are running our, Israel and U.S. relations. Their wet dream is to have, Jesus come back when, there's war in the Middle East, and they all get to float up into heaven, and all of us are like, no, please, and like, MAGA.
Enjoy the tribulation, suckers.
Yeah. Like, take me away, Jesus. Beam me up, Scotty.
I want the revelation. Yeah, beam me up.
Yeah, it's I say it before and I'll say it again. As a believer myself, like Christianity came to die here, a second death, in America, because these people that could pretend to be like religious people are anything but and anywhere near the Jeffersonian philosophy. The one that I understand is loving your enemy and turning the other cheek, and don't worship people, things, and put things above God. Like, Trump is above God for them. He's above Jesus at this point. So it's a cult. Yeah. It's a vicious cult. So it's really troubling. But while all these things are happening, Palestine is still being starved, and and all these, and people are being disappeared into into deportation centers. or detention centers, and now with the most, just today it came out that Supreme Court is going to allow immigrants to be deported into third world countries, like or third, not the country of their origin, like just they'll send them to like Chad, or South Africa, or wherever, like.
And then what we've seen with El Salvador, but it's like opening it up, like a policy, like it's okay. It's not a good thing.
It really isn't. So much to talk about, but let's just go ahead and jump into our guests here tonight. Woo, 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 woo. Yeah. So Fernando Deveras, as he is commonly known, is a father, educator, organizer, and abolitionist. And welcome to the show, Fernando.
Yeah, thank y'all for having me.
I'm gonna read everything about.
Nah,
I think
fine. I can let people
you
know.
Speak for yourself, brother. So welcome. And we've been talking about getting you on the show for a minute. So I know you've been busy, and we've all been busy with all the things that are going on. But before we jump into all the things happening and has happened in the last couple weeks, but even before then, right? Definitely want to give it a chance to talk about you as a person, because I know you as an educator when I first met you, I think before COVID, like around that time, and you were teaching at the time, but you're also doing abolitionist work. So maybe a little kind of your journey as far as what got you here, and to share with the audience. They don't know you. A lot of folks do, but some don't.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And with everything that's happening in the world, I think it's important to make time to have these conversations so that we can unpack it ourselves. We can share it with people who maybe are having trouble making sense of everything. So thank y'all for having this conversation.
Yeah.
A little bit about me. I won't go too in depth, but I think, something I was sharing before we start recording is I think it's important for people to know the stories of these people who are active in our community. We have people that are doing all kinds of work, but when we don't know our stories, then we're missing that piece where we can build that relationship and that trust and that deeper connection. So just a little bit about my background. So my family originally came from Jalisco, Mexico. My mom came here when she was 7 years old, and she had 10 siblings. And like most families, it was economic hardship, trying to get a better life. And, fast forward, she's in her early 20s. She's with my dad, and she has me and my two brothers. And he ends up getting deported when I was around 3 years old. He was in some messy business. So he gets caught, gets sent back home to Mexico. And my mom follows with him to try and start our family there. It ends up not really working out with them. It wasn't the relationship wasn't meant to be. They had a lot of things they needed to work on. So my mom brings me and my brothers back here. And honestly, for me, that whole early stage of my life is like it's a blank. Something I've learned from Leslie, my partner, in the work that we do is when you're experiencing those kind of traumatic shifts and all these different dynamics, sometimes your brain just goes into survival mode. So I imagine there's some of that at play. But regardless, I come back here to the U.S. I'm with my mom. And, the immigrant experience, big family parties, I've, eaten all the food, listening to all the music, but I never really had like a strong sense of my personal identity. There was never that conversation about, this is where we're from, this is what our family is about. It was kind of just a kid floating through life and figuring myself out. Around high school is when I started really exploring things like philosophy and politics. I was big on I would watch like CNN, MSNBC, Daily Show, that kind of thing. Boo Republicans, yay Democrats. Yeah. That was kind of my vibe.
Jon Stewart.
Yeah, basically, like Jon Stewart was a hero for me, and I feel like he still does a lot of powerful work to call out the bullshit. Can we cuss on here?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah.
Call out the
if Trump can, so can we.
Yeah, so like calling out the absurdity of the world that we're in, and pointing to just like these figures that are revered and deemed as like above everybody else, and he's like, no, they're human beings, they're idiots just like anyone else you might see on the street, So for me, that was like my early introduction to politics. I studied to become a teacher. I got a multiple subject teaching credential after getting my bachelor's in psychology at Cal State Fullerton. So I got my BA in psych, followed up, and got my multiple subject teaching credential. Around that time, I had my son, who he's 10 years old now. He's gonna be 11 in August. So I'm a dad, I have my psych degree, I'm gonna become a teacher. And in teaching is where I really stepped into the kind of work that I do right now, where I'm the classes that I taught, it was a middle school, so I was teaching like 6th, 7th, 8th grade students about world history and English and journalism and all these different things, social emotional learning. And you have to try and take these complex issues and explain it so that a 10-year-old who doesn't want to be there, number one cares about it, and number two can understand it.
Yeah.
So that's where I got a lot of my, I'd say, practice in the kind of work that I do now. Fast forward to 2022, I actually stepped out of the classroom and I was recruited to work at a local nonprofit. Y'all probably know about it, Accord. They saw the kind of work I was doing to educate people online, taking photos and making videos, talking about what's happening locally. And so they brought me in to do some work for them. I learned about the nonprofit space, I met a lot of cool people there doing important work. It ended up not working out. You know, it's a conversation for another day.
Yeah.
But I stepped away from Accord, and during that time, I also met my partner, Leslie Priscilla. She has an organization called Latinx Parenting, and a huge audience online with, you know, at the time, she had around like 170, 180,000 followers. Now she's like at 225. And with her, I was able to take what I was doing here locally, talking to around, you know, starting at like 300 people, and then like 1,000 people, and then 3,000 people. And she's showing me how to reach a much broader audience. And so now, you know, I'm lucky enough to have a platform where we have around like 45,000 people who are tuning in to see what's going on here locally, but also how can they make sense of what's happening around the world? Like y'all are talking about Palestine, Iran, and all these different situations happening on the national and the international scale. We have an opportunity to educate people that I might not meet in person, but I know that they share similar values to me. You know, so that's like a brief summary. There's a lot of gaps that I left in there, but in a nutshell, that's where I'm coming from.
Right on, man. Yeah, no, I think that's important, you know, to you know, was it your hero arc or your villain arc, you know? Yeah, whatever.
To be determined.
Yeah, depending on who you're talking about, you know,
Yeah.
Or with about you. Yeah, because you definitely have ruffled some feathers, to say the least, and we're gonna get into that. But
Yeah, good stuff.
I remember that you would be outside of the jails, right, with materials for folks that were getting out of the local jail here in the middle of the night, right? Like they would release them, and with like no money, no bus pass, no way to call their loved ones, and you and another person would be out there, right? Like that's, you know, I saw that you were doing.
Yeah, there was around 2020 is when I got involved rather in the organizing around police brutality, police corruption in local politics, where they're buying off politicians, taking a majority of the resources that are supposed to be allocated to help the residents. You know, George Floyd was killed, and people took to the streets, and it was COVID. And I'm teaching virtually during that time. So while I'm teaching virtually, trying to help my students navigate that situation, I'm also seeing news and on the ground here in Santana, in Orange County, abroad, this activity going on trying to call out police brutality, racial discrimination. And so there were a lot of things that were happening around that time in terms of protests and organizing work. One of the things that did pop up, we were talking to folks inside of the jails that were seeing all kinds of injustice. They had rotten food that they were getting. There was, you know, all kinds of abuses happening inside the jail. And so there was a collective of folks that organized to address that, but also to provide resources to people as they were coming out. And so it wasn't just two of us, it was like a wide group of people. And we would basically just leave out resources to folks as they're coming out, because when they get out of the jails, they don't give them any kind of real resources. They send them out at 11 o'clock at night and are leaving them stranded oftentimes. So that was something that...
check. You're like, good luck getting this cash somewhere at 11 p.m. Yeah, and here's your phone, it's not charged. Sorry. You know, it's...
Yeah, so it was all kinds of messiness. But again, for us, it's like this is a symptom of a broader system that doesn't value human life, where you have police and the carceral system that are getting all these resources. Meanwhile, they're leaving people out to dry. How can we take that energy, take those resources to help these people? You know, I appreciate organizations like Neutral Ground and Project Kinship even that provide jobs and training and education and community to people so that they can get off the street. They can get off of this life of crime that they might be falling into because they got nothing else to do. They have no other options to really make it out when this is all they've seen, and they are labeled with this sign that says you're a bad person. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I think as an educator, you see firsthand how perhaps, you know, the school system fails some of our kids, or, you know, falls through the cracks, you know, and especially if you don't engage them. But I think that's what's so important about with what you do and other folks, that are like influencers or video essayists, or there's different terms now for the things that you do, like short form or long form. But I know, like with of course COVID, you saw a big rise of TikTok in particular, but also Instagram and different platforms where people were getting at home, stuck, and getting educated on the politics of the civil rights movement, of this, the World War II, and different things. And so and to be able to break it down and like in a snack size. Of course, these are complex issues, like very like you could write books and people have, but to be able to like lay it down, like this is why this happened and this is why we must prevent these things from happening. And I know that you were part of the Black Lives Matter movement, and also tying it into Black liberation movement from the 60s, right? So like, what are some of the things that you saw like from that Black Lives movement, that helped, that perhaps you learned from, or you were able to connect with other people about, that helped to shape what's happening right now?
Wow, okay. I think for me personally, that was the first time that I was really taken to the streets in that way. And so I was learning a lot about what the dynamics look like, what the energy in a crowd can become based on who's directing the crowd, based on what parameters you've set for that crowd. I learned about how to take that energy where people want to mobilize and go out and demonstrate, and how do you turn that into actionable change, policy change, political power, turn it into educational opportunities so that more people are able to see, like you were saying, all these connections. Because it's not just this cop killed this person and we're angry about it. It's this cop has impunity to kill this person, who is in this position because of a broader system that failed him. And this police officer, who will be protected by that system, is not just a bad apple, but is a symptom of this system that allows for police to have that level of power and abuse that power in our communities. So I'd say like those are some of the aspects I learned. Mm-hmm. I think a big one that I tell people, we recently had a teach-in where we were talking to folks who are just now stepping into the movement. With everything that's happening in ICE, with the ICE raids, you're going to see a lot of young people who are activated, and they see this is my neighborhood where we got federal agents coming in and slamming people to the cement and throwing them in a van. If you see that and you don't say something, if you don't do something, then a part of you is going to hurt inside. And so we have a lot of people who have that energy, that fire inside, and they're like, what do I do? So at this teach-in, we're telling people, like, here's some things that we learned. I understand why you're here. I need you to know what you can do besides just going out and protesting and marching. How can you build community? How can you organize your community? How can you build relationships and networks to support each other? But also, something that we learned in 2020 is, how can you look out for infiltrators? How can you look out for undercovers, police? Because while we may not have a list of names and faces, there's 100% certainty in my mind that we had undercovers in Orange County that were either participating in the protest or sometimes leading in the protest. And so that's something that I want to make sure people are aware of. I brought, I carry, anytime there's things going on, I carry a book to kind of guide me. Right now, I'm reading the Black Panther Speaks book, which is a collection of essays and speeches and letters. But something that they talk about is recognizing COINTELPRO tactics. For those who don't know, COINTELPRO, it's short for Counterintelligence Program. And you were talking about like the civil rights movement. This was basically how our government was infiltrating and sabotaging the leadership of the civil rights movement. So I'm sure y'all have heard at least some semblance of this. MLK was not killed by some crazy racist. He was disrupting a lot of things that the government didn't want to be disrupted. Yeah. He wasn't just fighting for racial equality. He was fighting for workers' rights. He was organizing workers to strike for better conditions.
He was anti-war.
He was anti-war, beyond Vietnam. If y'all haven't heard that speech or read that speech, please look it up on YouTube if you got to listen to it.
But it'll destroy any kind of notion you have about this like whitewash MLK. Like, I have a dream. It's like, no, he was
pretty radical.
Some real crazy.
He was going on into a radical bent.
Yeah. Well, even that, like, saying it's crazy, saying it's radical. No, he was telling the truth.
Yeah.
Well, for
that's considered radical in reality.
They were just like, wow. Mm-hmm. Come on, Martin. Like, we were with you when we were talking about like, yeah.
Whoa, poverty and war, whoa.
Yeah, in Beyond Vietnam, he talks about how people, or was this in the letter in Birmingham jail, where he says, I can't condemn the violence on the streets in the ghettos without first condemning the most violent perpetrator of violence in the world, my own government. Like that kind of language doesn't sit well with the people up top. And so people like that were persecuted. Malcolm X, everyone knows Malcolm X by any means necessary, but it wasn't just this idea that people have of him where he's going out and angering black people. He was saying, no, we need to organize and understand what the situation is that we're in and come together to find a solution. And because he was so effective at that, and because there were so many people who were coming to his organization, they're like, this is a threat. Fred Hampton of the Black Panther Party, Chairman Fred Hampton, he was 21 years old, leading the Chicago chapter. And he was assassinated. Why? Because he was forming gang truces. He was getting gangs to stop the violence and support their community.
He was building a rainbow coalition, right?
Yeah, building a rainbow coalition with the Puerto Rican Young Lords, with the Young Patriots, a white organization. He was feeding kids, and police saw that as a threat because they're like, he's making them look too good.
Yeah.
And so they would go in and sabotage the breakfast programs. And these are the people that are targeted by our government. And so if I see those individuals who were doing so much to fight for their people, and now here we are today where we see, like we said, masked, I don't know what's. Maybe they're bounty hunters, maybe they're agents, maybe they're just kidnappers. And they're going out and snatching our people up. And we have our people who are wanting to fight back. We're wanting to resist that injustice. We need people to know what this government is capable of. Because you might be on the right side of history, you might be on the right side morally. That's not going to stop the government from coming after you.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's scary times.
And we talked about things like this from even before, like the dichotomy between the good immigrant and the bad immigrant, and like, how that just created a hierarchy within our people. It's like, no, we all deserve a right to stay here. Yeah, there's like bad people, but like that's so minimal compared to like, the vast majority of people that are paying taxes, trying to do things the right way, and waiting for the moment to have a pathway to citizenship. And most people are just kind of stuck in this position where, they don't have the ability to do that. But, like this has been, and we had Sandra Danda and Casey before, with Orange County Rapid Response Network. They're doing, amazing work. And this was before, this recent ICE raid stuff. So they were already kind of like getting prepared and letting people know about their rights and this and that. But I feel like a lot of things that we talked about then, it's out the door. Like people have no rights. There is no this is signed by a judge. This is not like, they really kind of were just like, we've heard that Stephen Miller went into a meeting with, ICE leaders, Border Patrol, and said like, we are getting 3,000 people, like full stop, a day. Like that's your quota. Like we need this. And like forget about going after the criminals and stuff. Basically, we need to just run it up, like So then that's when they started going after people at Home Depots, at car washes, so like the swap meet here the other day, like places where our community are just trying to work or are trying to just spend time with and support Latino immigrant businesses. But then these kind of things that were just frankly shocking for if you look at history, and I studied World War II, and I saw he didn't just like Hitler just didn't start putting people in gas chambers. He started by systematically removing their rights and just rounding them up and putting them into places and making sure that everybody's had their passport and like had to have the gold star and stuff. So what did you think about when you started seeing like these Gestapo-like tactics of just going after people and tackling, especially here in Orange County?
There was a friend of mine who, when Trump won last year, we were he's a black man, and we were talking, and I was like, "What do you think about the results?" He's like, "I know what country I live in." I was like, I know where I am.
It's like, this is not America.
Like
this is America.
There were a lot of people who were surprised and were saying, "How could I know what country I live in?"
Yes.
And when I see the those Gestapo tactics, I think something else. I've been wanting to make a video on this for a while, but I don't think enough people recognize that the United States was actually a template for Nazi Germany, where Hitler and the Nazis looked at the United States and said, how are they enforcing these segregation laws? If people are married to somebody of a separate race, how do we legislate that?
Oh my God.
Is it the one drop rule, which we had here in the U.S. that says one drop of African ancestry and you're black? The Nazis were like, that's a little too much.
They're too radical.
You know?
And they're like, whoa, yeah.
Yeah, so
There's a big eugenics movement in this country.
yeah, there's a huge eugenic. There's a series. I want to say it's like a PBS
Yes.
PBS Studios.
Yeah.
You can look into the history of eugenics in this country.
That's a great one. Sorry.
But again, like I know where I live. I know about the history of genocide against indigenous peoples, where they did not treat them at all like human. They treated them like vermin to be eradicated so that they could take over this land. I know what happened to black people in this country, where they were tortured and mutilated and brutalized for centuries, treated as property. And even after they were liberated, or after they liberated themselves through the Civil War, they were still treated like subhuman. They were put into ghettos and treated like they needed to protect the white community from the threat that they posed. So I know the legacy of this country. That's why I'm so big on teaching the history, because if you understand the history of this country, you're not surprised. You're not surprised. When you see the history, you're like, oh, I know what this is, and here's how people have fought back before. That's what I hope people get to when it comes to this stuff. If I see ICE agents slamming people to the ground, police used to do that to people all the time. You know, you talk to anybody who used to be in gang neighborhoods, they're like, oh yeah, they do that. That's how they operate.
I mean, the Zoot riots, right? Operation Wetback, right? They gave mass deported us before, and they've beat us up with impunity because of racial profiling.
Yeah, like you mentioned the Operation Wetback, like that history. Like we understand colonization, 1492. Fast forward to the U.S. becoming an independent nation, continuing on that colonial project, expanding westward, and then they run into the wall with Mexico. What are we gonna do? We go to war with Mexico, the Mexican-American War, and now we have all these Mexicans living on territory that is now the U.S. What are we gonna do? We're gonna make them citizens until it's an inconvenience for us. And then Mexican repatriation happens, and 2 million Mexicans are deported. I want to say 60% of them were considered U.S. citizens at the time. And then World War II happens. There's a labor shortage. What are we gonna do? Oh, we're gonna have the Bracero program, have some Mexicans come over here to work the fields to feed our families. Okay, war's over. What are we gonna do with all these Mexicans? Let's get them out of here. Operation Wetback, and we send them back.
Yeah.
So knowing the history is really important.
That is true. And that
Japanese
kinda makes
internment.
It makes me think of what's scary though about, I know where we live, and because like Trump got a mandate to do this kind of deportation stuff from the public in a sense, like the right wing. Like, because they, when I go online and look at the comments, it's pretty disgusting how people see these ICE raids and they're celebrating them and stuff. And maybe we can try to tie it back to the Latinx parenting. And I know you're saying like when you're growing, you didn't have an identity for that culture and stuff. Like, how do we bring these ideas to the culture so when people see that, they don't see, oh yeah, that's awesome, get them out of here. They see something else, something that helps workers.
When I see there was a post that we shared a couple weeks back before the last council meeting. We shared a post showing the massive crowd of people marching through downtown and saying, "Come to the next city council meeting. We need y'all there." And there were comments flooding from white racist people from all walks of life. Very some of them use like bot accounts where it's like no profile pic, but other people were like, "Here's a picture of me with my kids," saying "Deport, deport, deport."
Yeah.
Get those illegals. Thank you, ICE. They're very proud. They're very confident in their hatred. And what we always tie that back to, and in the work that Leslie and I do, we talk about the nature of dehumanization. And there's all these systems at play that convince regular human beings to dehumanize other human beings. So whether it's white supremacy that says anybody who doesn't fit this particular profile is not equal to me. That's applicable right here. Whether it's even just like the capitalist structure that says we're dehumanizing people who sleep on the street. Why? Because they didn't work hard enough. They're on drugs. They did something bad. I don't have to care about them. We dehumanize people in all walks of life.
Yeah.
And politicians like Trump, and it's not just Trump. Something else I talk about is like Trump's a symptom. Trump's a symptom of a broader structure.
Yeah.
But these politicians are more than happy to exploit that part of our human psychology where we want to feel safe. And if you can present me with this idea that someone else is the threat to me, and then you're presenting a solution to take care of that threat, I'm on your team.
Yeah.
And that's what I see when it comes to the conversation around illegals. The threat to most Americans today is not an illegal immigrant who's working a job trying to feed their family. The threat is this major structure that we have where the wealthy and the powerful take all the resources and leave us out to dry.
Yeah.
But obviously that narrative doesn't serve them, and so they got to point the finger at somebody.
Exactly. And dude, that's an amazing point, because how do you make that point to average people about that? It's really the workers' issue. Like, I think it's interesting, that thing you just mentioned, like this ebbing and flowing of policy. Like, how many people do we want to bring over here? How many people do we want over here that don't have rights? So it seems like the Democrats, they'll never open the border all the way. They'll let a certain number of people in, and then the Republicans will never close it all the way. They'll only kick a certain number of people out because they need to float some number that satisfies the labor, right? Mm-hmm. So they're in control, right? They decided how many people should be here. So yeah, anyway, like I was trying to like reframe the issue, you know, like, because we're doing worker against worker when we're saying, hey, undocumented laborers are hurting us. Look, maybe there are some markets where that is the case, but in the grand scheme of things, we're all laborers, and really the capitalists are the one that are pulling all the strings as to what the
In a globalized world too, like whether we're getting exploited here in US of A or getting exploited, you know, in another part of the world by an American corporation, like, you know, like exploitation is exploitation. There's a guy called FD Signifier, who I follow a bunch, and he kind of
Yeah, I'm a fan.
he's broken down recently this video about like, yeah, just how there's this big movement, like not a big but a substantial movement of people like stay home, like for African Americans. Like, this is not our fight. Like, you don't, you know, support these, you know, like these recent protests against the ICE raids, and kind of, you know, going back into this, like, you know, us fighting amongst each other, because it's like, you know, well, if undocumented workers are working for less, that means black people are not, you know, don't get those jobs. So like, you know, if they're gone, then they're going to be able to hire us and pay us what we deserve. I mean, you know, like go back into Cesar Chavez, you know, and the critiques around him and how he saw undocumented folks. Of course, towards the end of his life, he changed his stance on it. But, you know, it's very easy. All to say is, like, it's very easy for us to kind of fall into this like lazy, you know, breakdown of, you know, who's our enemy. And people like Trump and others and Hitler before him exploit that and said, like, you know, it's not the government, it's, you know, it's these people, and I am the one that can fix everything, you know.
yeah.
You know,
Scapegoating.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a problem. But so, you know, these recent ICE raids are happening, and people start coming out and such, you know, and so of course Santana, you know, is a sanctuary city, and, you know, and folks before, like, you know, fought for this. We're, I believe, the only sanctuary city in all of Orange County. Other places have, like, you know, like Anaheim has a welcoming city, right? Like, and in, you know, but this one was out, which, you know, kind of adds to why, you know, the federal government chose to have, you know, a National Guard here. And we were the only city here, like, aside from LA. In all of, I didn't know this, like, in all of California, it was Santana and it was LA that had National Guard.
Really? Oh.
Yeah. So it's like, you know, that's how much they see us as a threat. But so, you know, it seems like we are on the right side of history. But when it comes to this, embracing ourselves and saying, like, we protect our immigrant communities here, and, you know, the state is also a sanctuary state, although, you know, it varies from city to city. You go to Huntington Beach, it don't really feel like a sanctuary, you know, like a
Who's
a place.
sanctuary again? Yeah.
Yeah, but like what? So like. What, obviously you were very vocal from the get-go, and you have been, about issues about police brutality, and that was kind of like there was a convergence, right, between issues with the SAPD that have been long, you know, going. I mean, I got involved, we did, and we were, you know, through the Occupy movement back in 2011, we were talking about how they were killing our people. And granted, like, they've done a lot to reform it, and we've had some good police chiefs of late, but as you mentioned earlier, the culture of SAPD is not great. So, you know, these ICE raids happen, people get mad and then come out, and then, you know, and then we see like oppression of SAPD, and then you see a lack of leadership from the top, and you spoke to it. So perhaps you can kind of, you know, work, you know, how you saw it and what made you, you know, lift up your voice. And
Yeah. So I think something else that, for anybody who's listening that isn't familiar with what a sanctuary city is, I think we want to explain that. Sanctuary cities was actually a policy, from what I understand, that was promoted by law enforcement agencies, starting, I want to say, in LA. But basically, they recognize that we're operating in areas where people have mixed immigration status. And if we're trying to address crime in these areas, but the people don't feel comfortable, safe talking to us, they're not going to talk to us. If they think that talking to me hola, ¿cómo estás? What's your status? Are you a citizen?
Yeah.
They're not going to talk to me. So sanctuary cities was a policy to actually help build that trust between police departments and undocumented communities.
Right.
Now, I think the limitations of that, and what I recently had a conversation with an officer this week. People who follow me online, they think I'm like fuck the police, and at some point I was fuck the police. But I've since kind of matured in my approach, where I recognize that police are cogs in a machine. And so I can see your humanity. I'm still going to call out the fact that you're a part of a system, like you were saying, that serves to ultimately oppress people from these vulnerable communities. But I was talking to an officer about the violent arrest that happened over the weekend on Bristol, and I was like, "What do you think about that?" He's like, "There's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. It's federal agents. They're doing what they came here to do. We're not able to intervene. It supersedes us." So for me, just that is a tension point for the community. If the police are saying they're here to serve and protect, which is the motto, right? And yet here we have our loved ones, our family members that are being kidnapped on the street by people we don't know, who refuse to identify themselves, who have no concern for due process, any of that. And the police have their hands tied. And the only time that we see police presence in this whole situation is when they are forming a military-style rank line to keep young people from protesting this injustice.
Yeah.
That's another tension point.
Not a good look.
If your only presence in this situation is holding a baton with a gas mask and a riot helmet, and you're throwing tear gas at people,
Yeah.
you're creating an enemy
Yeah.
for the people who are fighting against this injustice.
Yeah.
I think something else, like when it comes to just you were talking about the nature of the SAPD and the corruption that's there. Again, I'm willing to say there are people who join police departments, there are people who join our military who have good intentions. They're trying to pay their bills, they're trying to take care of their family, they're trying to get a nice job with benefits, and that's what they're told, to do this. This is the way to be a good citizen. It still puts you in a position where when shit hits the fan, you're on the wrong side of the line. And what I've seen when we're doing local politics is there's a very corrupt culture in our police department. We had Chief Valentine and the former Chief Valentine and former president of the Police Officers Association, Jerry Serrano, who had like an internal civil war. Like it was out in the open. They had social media pages where they were calling each other out for their bullshit. So knowing that that's the case, these are flawed human beings, just like we all are flawed human beings. The difference is that these flawed human beings happen to carry a lot of political power in our city. And so for me, it was always about bringing that to the forefront so that people recognize that we don't have to tolerate this. We don't have to accept having a rogue police department, a corrupt police department that is criminalizing our communities. We deserve better and we can get better, but we have to be willing to organize and make that happen.
Yeah, no, different cities have had different approaches to the protests and such, but yeah, it did seem a bit heavy-handed. I mean, I was out there, and so I was just like, oh wow, they're really shooting tear gas canisters at us, and like it really didn't feel like it was violent or it was aggressive, and people were yelling at them and stuff, but it wasn't, and when the ICE, cars were coming out, like folks were like engaging in civil disobedience, and trying to like stop them from doing that. And then of course, they started spraying people with tear gas and stuff. Different folks were out there. They could kind of speak more to it, but that's kind of what I saw. And by and large, that's what people were kind of saying. Like people were 95% peaceful. There was kids there, young people, first time, they're, energetic. Somebody throws a water bottle, and then these dudes start shooting. Well, then they're going to start throwing more water bottles, and hey, there's a rock there, might throw that too. But, then it just escalates more. But, these are kids, like, they're not, you're grown ass adults, like with a gun, and like, you can hurt somebody. So yeah, it was crazy then to hear our mayor, of course, come out and say, like, this is like purely destruction of our businesses in our downtown, like
Pure destruction.
Pure destruction.
That's quite a claim.
Yeah. So I and so many others were just like livid, like that, like our mayor of our sanctuary city, like rather than like admonish the ICE raids and say like we stand with community, we're gonna defend our community. She goes out of her way to attack our council colleagues, and and people that were just out there, protesting, peacefully, many for the first time and stuff, and it struck a chord,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah, if I could
Yeah,
just
of
speak
course.
to that, like, and I'm sure Valerie or some of her minions are seeing this. I make it clear, like, there's this idea, same like when people look at me on my position of police. I don't hate anybody. I don't have a hatred towards you. But if you're in a position where you are potentially harming our communities, I have to call you out on that. And so with Valerie, when she came into office, after the election in 2022, I made an effort to talk to her. I made an effort to build that communication, that dialogue. It was around the time of the recall of Jesse Lopez where I realized, okay, she's not interested in talking. She's here to do what she's here to do, which is serve the interests of the Police Officers Association that paid more than $200,000 to get her into that spot. Because everybody knew it. Everybody knew that this recall was politically motivated. It was bullshit. It was going to be a waste of tax dollars. I spoke with Danny Vega, and he himself shared, yeah, this is a bullshit recall, but you know what? It's on our side this time, so we're here for it. And
anything for a council majority.
I wonder what he thought about Ceci Iglesias.
he was against that.
Oh, well, I mean,
He ran for council.
well, that was against his side.
Exactly.
But see, I was against both of those. 'Cause
Yeah.
I'm against the POA winning that political act.
Yeah, that's not what democracy is. They'll say, hey, this is legal, and it is legal.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it right.
It's dirty.
Yeah,
But
but,
we all see it's dirty.
But to get to that point, when I see Valerie operating in that way, I have to highlight that two-facedness, that fact that she's not just here to serve the people, as she says, calling herself the people's mayor. She represents a very specific interest.
Yeah, certain people.
Yeah, and so when, again, the ICE raids are happening and people are saying, what are we gonna do? And her only commentary before the protest was, there's nothing we could do, this is DC, and we're here to help, but what are we gonna do?
Luke Correa said,
Luke Correa said-
keep quiet and stuff. And then Luke comes out, was like, I never said that. I never knew this woman.
Yeah.
He threw her under the bus.
I got
hard.
comments on Lou too. But just, that is her posturing to say, keep your head down, lay low, and for those of you who are beating your chest, I hope you're still beating your chest. They are still beating their chest. And now she's learning, oh shit, I better be beating my chest too, because this is what our people deserve, a leader who's gonna be beating their chest to defend them.
Yeah.
And like you said, the fact that when the protests happened, I really want to we need to connect those dots. A government that is dehumanizing our people sends federal agents to kidnap our people. Our people see that and rise up and protest and demand for change. Police show up and create this tension in the community. Anytime police are present when there's that many people, they are creating tension. They are a target point, right?
Yeah.
Organizers, people who are doing these protests know if there's no police there, we can usually get people on the same page. We can lead a march. We can get some speakers going. We can get some music and everyone's dancing. It's usually a very kind of joyful and very collective experience. But you create that tension, and police use their weapons. They use rubber bullets. The federal agents are using tear gas, and then SAPD is using tear gas, and all of that happens. And the most vocal comment she has is pure destruction, chaos. Everybody go home. That's a failure of leadership, and I think people are seeing that, and I think she's seeing that now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's dishonest because look, there was tagging, but just because some taggers show up, guess what? It's in public.
I'll say this, man. I don't care about someone tagging a sidewalk when there's a threat of people being disappeared. That's the least of my worries. And if that's the only thing you're going to speak on, then
That's kind of the price you pay. Like
Sure, they were, there was water bottles, but what if they were thirsty? I think they were just trying
the
to like,
police are like, "Are you thirsty?"
they're literally carrying.
That riot gear looks hot.
Yeah,
you
they're wearing military attire and they have riot shields. And you're gonna say a water bottle being thrown at you is justification for tear gassing a whole crowd?
Yeah.
Like if we were in the council chambers and I happened to throw a water bottle at the dais, which I would never do,
By the way,
they wouldn't tear gas the chambers.
unless requested
You
by
know?
a thirsty council member. Yo, I got you, buddy. Woo.
So yeah.
Yeah. Going back to I want to mention briefly that I was out there for one thing, just like because it was like I was just looking at what's happening. I was shot at by rubber bullets and stuff.
When?
Because some kid threw a bottle. Like all the cops that said, "Hey, let's all turn our backs from a crowd and walk away." And it was like, I think they did that on purpose because that's when the kid threw the bottle. They're not watching. And then everyone else gets shot at and pinned down. He runs away. long story short, I'd fled, but they were trying to detain people. They were instructing people to get down. And that's not in their policy. Like, their whole policy's online. You can go read it. They're supposed to announce that they're shooting at you with like right suppression stuff, right? Because how are you supposed to know it's not bullets? Like, a lot of people were panicking and freaked out that they were being fired at. But it's like, so what?
And you can create like a stampede, and more people could
Yeah,
die.
big time. So I see one positive thing as like people coming out to the city council. In the headlines in the newspapers, it's saying the mayor's having calls for her resignation. Like, that's a really powerful thing to come out from that action.
Yeah.
What else can people do?
Yeah, and I want to speak to that point too. You know, when you're talking about the escalation that happened on that day, Corky Gonzalez, he was a Chicano organizer with La Raza Unida party back in the, I want to say, 60s.
Yep.
And he said, you know, nothing will radicalize you more than, or faster than getting hit in the head by a police club. Like, for a lot of the people who were there that day, they saw this is what your government is willing to do to you.
Yeah.
And when you see that reality, you have to make a choice now, you know? So I think the fact that people showed up to that council meeting, that was people making a choice.
Yeah.
Saying, I'm not going to sit back and stay quiet and say, oops, we made a mistake. They shouldn't have thrown water bottles. They're going to say, no, we don't deserve to be treated like domestic terrorists, which is basically how the situation was, you know?
Yeah.
The council meeting, I was making calls, and there were other organizations that were making calls, but I wanted to be very vocal about, we need y'all at the council meeting. Not because we think the city council has the power to push these National Guard tanks out of the city, not because we think they're going to shut down ICE operations, but because, number one, we need our leadership to be more vocal. It can't just be Hernandez and Vasquez and Lopez and Ty showing up to these events. We need Peñalosa and Becerra and Valerie, who are representing the city, to be as vocal, as adamant that we don't tolerate this kind of occupation of our city. And if you can't do that, then step aside. But number two, for me, it was an opportunity to show people this is the mechanisms of power in your local politics. So it's not going to be the solution to all the problems we see, but now you know you don't have to just stay on the sidewalks and march up and down where the police say it's okay. If you really want to see who's got power in this city, go to the city council. And after these ICE raids are done, we're still going to have problems in our community, and we're still going to need you to show up. And now you've had that experience of going to City Hall, parking in the structure, going into the chambers, speaking to those representatives, how you really feel.
Waiting hours.
Yeah.
To speak to, you know, like,
Waiting for the consent calendar.
you know, this is democracy, baby. Yeah, you know, like, as an organizer, you know, that you are, and myself, you know, like anybody, you know, that has organized, like, and was there to see that, like, you know, like, it would just warm my heart because, you know, you saw like a bunch of like people like get their activist wings of sorts, you know, or just, you know, for the first time going up and speaking truth to power, like nervous as heck. But what was most captivating for me was that it was an organic, like, uprising of people. You know, yes, like you know, like, you know, we're telling people and we're promoting for folks to go. But like, even you, like, you're not a nonprofit, you know, like, you're just like a guy with like a microphone and, like, you know, and a page that, you know, encourage folks, you know, and to you know, to come out and speak their truth. And so, you know, and there was no written speeches, you know, like talking points, like, you know, passed out to people. I mean, you know, you let folks know like what the context of what was, but ultimately people went up and said, you know, whatever the heck they wanted, you know, and some of it was, you know, a little sassy and was, you know, very harsh towards it. You know, I didn't condone everything that happened, although, you know, at times I laughed at the things that were being said, you know, against, you know, the mayor. But I got to say, like, you know, I've been watching meetings. Anybody that's been watching meetings for a long time, and you know, you watch them. Like, we've seen how she's acted up there, you know, towards her colleagues. You know, just very bully type of tactics. You know, and so for her to kind of have to sit through 4 hours of just getting berated by her community, you know, for as much as like perhaps she has like a huge ego, you know, anybody within politics has to have some sort of an ego, you know, to believe in themselves and stuff. She believes perhaps too much into herself, you know, and that her backers are gonna, you know, stick with her no matter what. But she had a humble dose of humble pie, and you know, she realized that it was a PR nightmare, and so now she's been video after video. Which, like, City of Santa Ana, like, can the other council members like have a chance to speak, you know, through it? Like, why is, like, you know, that city page just specifically, you know, to like help, you know, cover her tracks and, like, you know, reform her public, you know, persona, you know, bringing pastors and bringing like the OCLF president, and I guess just today, right, there was a video.
It was, I want to say this weekend, where, again, after, I want to say Senor Barranco was his last name, where he was arrested, and she's sharing a, green screen video of her watching the scene, and she's saying, this is terrible, this is horrible, and, ICE agents, if you're going to be arresting people, do it humanely. Don't do it this way. Which, again, you're getting warmer.
Yeah,
Getting warmer.
you're in the right direction.
You're on the right
You're
track.
still cold, but
On the right track. It's
yeah,
not about how they're doing it. It's, hey, don't kidnap people in our
yeah,
city.
at all.
Period.
Not the manner in which you.
Not, hey, do it nicely, please.
Yeah, yeah.
Not,
Yeah, no, it felt very much like if you're gonna beat your wife, like you have to like
Yeah.
with like a small like little
Yeah.
twig,
But-
No bruises.
yeah, no bruises. Like,
But yeah, again, I stress this point, and when I said this at the council when we were waiting outside to speak, I was like, I don't want people to hyperfixate on Valerie, because again, Valerie is a product of the system, the product that's the system that says, say these lines, support these people, stand and salute the flag at all times, and this and that, and anyone who deviates from that, they're not serious, they're not real. You don't have to worry about them. The city council meeting where there were over 100, I want to say 130 people that signed up to give public comment. And for a full 3 minutes, when she tried to cut it down to, I want to say 1 or 2 minutes.
minute and a half.
Yeah,
Yeah, she
yellow's
said-
the new red type
Yeah,
stuff.
so she wanted to cut it down a minute and a half. They said, no, we're getting our full 3 minutes. And 130 plus people coming, with more people waiting outside.
Yeah.
And when you see that, you, as egotistic as you might be, as certain that you might be that I'm the adult in the room and everyone else doesn't know what they're talking about, that has to humble you a little bit. You have to have some reflection and say, okay, maybe I do have some learning to do. And so I see her making progress. I still don't feel that she is fully genuine in her actions. And I know that we have better people somewhere in this city that can represent this city in that way. But yeah, those moments will humble a politician. And I'm glad to see that it's had some effect.
I mean, yeah, like I've never seen like such a public, like,
outpouring.
like against anybody. I mean, Pulido was a terrible, like forever, 20 plus years. But Pulido had this gift where he made you believe that he was on your side, even when you he very much was not. And then you remember we'd go up and speak and be like, and you blah blah blah, and you're like, thank you so much for your comments.
Miguel.
Next,
No, yeah. He was charismatic.
he had a charisma, and she just don't got it,
Well, sorry, just before we jump on
Yeah.
there too, I think something else that distinguishes that era and this era, social media has made a huge play. Where now we have
yeah.
we have pages like Santa Ana Problems with hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
And even like Neighbors of Santa Ana, who we know Danny Vega's administering that, but he can't control what everybody says on there.
Not anymore.
And
He was trying, right? You
dude-
remember you'd mention like anytime anybody would speak, against the mayor in
Yeah, if you-
particular, and stuff,
anybody who would
he
be
would
critical.
remove their comments and stuff.
Yeah. So the fact that we have that ability to educate people who would otherwise be disconnected from what's happening in local politics. Now
Yeah.
people, not only are they able to learn about it, but they're able to learn, how do I get involved? And so that's a new evolution
Yeah.
and a new development in one of the youngest cities in the county, where social media is driving the conversation. And I think we just need to keep pushing on that.
That's kind of crazy though, right? Because newspapers used to do that, and now that's so underfunded. We have the voiceover scene, they do their thing, but kind of the community stepping in,
Yeah.
to fill in that gap.
Yeah, but I mean, sometimes it's a dangerous time because there's so much information out there. What is right? And with the rise of AI, we'll get into it. But we're gonna have a problem with there's too much information and we don't know what's truth and what's not. So having trustworthy channels like yours and other ones that are actually Santanero, recently come out and really been on top of this stuff.
yeah.
So what are your thoughts about the movement for her to resign? Do you think that that's
Yeah.
feasible?
I've
waste
had
of time?
I've had a few people ask me, and some people mentioned it at the council meeting. So I'll say the same thing that I said, or similar comments to when people were trying to recall Jesse. If you really believe that Jesse Lopez is anti-community, that she's pro-crime, anti-cops, and you really want to get rid of her, there's a way to get rid of her. Run somebody against her. There's an election coming up.
Yeah.
Take her out. We don't need to waste hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayer money to make that point. Now, when it comes to Valerie, I feel like it's a little different because, again, when it was Jesse, we knew it wasn't an organic campaign. It was POA, not happy about the ratio of people on their team, so they're trying to flip the numbers. This is different. This is a politician who dropped the ball in a very significant way, and the people want to make a point to say, we're not going to tolerate this. And so It wasn't nonprofits calling for this. It wasn't even like organizers like myself who were saying we need to recall the mayor. It was people, like everyday people who were like, what can we do? Let's get rid of this person. So I would say my advice, and I've said this to others, if people want to recall the mayor, that's their prerogative. I would rather invest our energy in getting people up to speed. Again, this council meeting was huge. I hope the next council meeting has similar numbers or bigger numbers. But knowing, and Jose, I'm sure you know about this, like having been in this work, it's unlikely that we're going to have that many people in for the long haul. And so we need to find ways to keep people's endurance, keep people's stamina, keep people engaged in this conversation. If a recall is a means to do that, maybe that's something that we could try. But I would rather invest our time and energy in hosting educational spaces where we can bring people up to speed on, okay, you didn't like what the mayor did, let's tell you how she got there. Let's tell you who's behind her, who are her supporters. Let's power map this situation, because that's going to be a lot more worthwhile in the long run to get people up to speed on how all this works. And then also let's find another candidate, because you can recall her and she's out. Who's going to be mayor next?
Yeah.
If we don't have that in line, then we have a situation to address.
Somebody has to step up.
Yeah, we have all sorts of situations that could happen. Between Peñalosa, Jonathan, and Jesse running for assembly. Depending on how that turns out, we could have some open seats. Of course, Phil's running for re-election, so it'll be interesting there. And of course, the mayor's going to be running for re-election unless she wants to, go run against, a supervisor. We know. Which, given this current
I don't know how
climate, it
that's
would
gonna
seem
play.
much less,
Yeah.
like a smart strategic moment for her. She'll probably bide her time and, stay like, big boss of the small pond of Santana. But, yeah, there's a lot of stuff that could happen. But, if there was ever a moment, to kind of have, call for new leadership in the city, this could be it. But as you mentioned, and I know the cynic in me is like, protests, coming out to a city council, maybe you'll never come back again. That's step one. But step two is educating others, organizing and being in for the long haul. 'Cause
Yeah.
Change takes time. That's a hard pill to swallow for this generation that wants things yesterday. But we needed rent control years ago, and it took us 10 years to get it. We needed better district ways of voting and with district elections, and it took us a while to do it. So, but I see optimism and hope that a lot of these things have activated people, and as the things at the national level keep happening, then they'll see listen, you can't do a lot about the national stuff, but you could do a whole bunch on the local level, and that's where you should focus on, right? And I think that's kind of what you've been actually focusing on yourself, right? So you're gonna have an upcoming teach-in.
Yeah. So
talking about that.
yeah, so, like you said, if we really want to sustain this, I think so. So I've been in the organizing space here in Santana since 2020. Really, that's when I was really heavily involved. And as long as I've been here, I always say there's maybe 20 people you can count on seeing at the city council meetings. In a city of over 300,000 people, it shouldn't just be 20 people showing
The
up.
usuals, it's cheers.
Yeah. And obviously there's some behind the scenes players, and there's people who are doing things from other arenas. But in terms of people who are fighting to change the city in a direction that serves the community, it's a handful of people. It's James Baldwin has that quote, it's really just a small group of people who are trying to hold this world together. And we want to grow that number. So at the council meeting, I was telling people, if you really want to impact change, either join an organization or form an organization. If you're a student, form a student union. If you live in an apartment complex, form a tenant union. If you are working at a coffee shop, use that space to educate people how you can. Maybe form a union with your coworkers. Any little way that you can bring people together. And that's how we're really going to sustain it. The teach-ins that we're doing is just like an introduction. And I always tell people when we're doing these teach-ins, I was like, I don't want to call myself an expert. I don't want y'all to look at me as an expert. I don't want to be the Cesar Chavez of this movement. I want to be a source of knowledge for you, and I want to be able to point you in a direction that you can go. It's up to you to decide what you're going to do. Some people are going to say, we're going to focus on the political aspect. Let's start running people for office. Let's start pushing legislation. Other people are going to focus on the mutual aid. Let's make sure that families get the food and the resources they need during this time when they can't even leave their homes. Other people will focus on more radical aspects that I believe might be necessary when it comes to the history of civil disobedience to really put the state in their place, to know that we're not going to tolerate this kind of injustice. So I want people to know what the avenues are. And, I share stories like the Black Panther Party so that people know, here's template. that we have. And it's not just in history that we can look at. The organizations that are active now, you know, we were talking about Rapid Response Network. They're doing huge work. And I know that people have their issues with like the nonprofit space, and that there's sometimes lateral violence even in the organizing space. But we want to recognize the people that are activating our communities to impact change. You know, you got the Rapid Response Network in LA. We were talking about Unión del Barrio doing neighborhood patrols. We're working with some organizers right now to organize community patrols throughout the city. Like, it needs to be autonomous. It needs to be widespread. It needs to be from all angles, all fronts. It can't just be look to this person to lead the way.
That's true.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. You know, and whether you're buying out a flower person, you know, person selling flowers, or the fruit, you know, vendors, like you've seen a lot of beautiful solidarity, you know, in this moment, and we need a lot more of that and sustained, right? Because it's gonna take that, but yeah, as we're going through it, and perhaps it's like, you know, frantic, and you're trying to find like there's a place for you, and that doesn't include doom scrolling and just, you know, watching, you know, all these horrible videos of people, you know, people being separated from their families, and all the things that we're doing. I mean, it was similar to like with the whole Palestinian, you know, like situation. It was like you just see this carnage. There's like hyper normalization is the term, right, that they're using, where like you can really literally be like, I'm at the gym and I'm watching like, you know, videos of like kids like, you know, dismembered in Palestine, and like, you know, the next thing, you know, I'm like, well, driving to you know, to work, and I'm seeing like, you know, like children crying for their parents because they're getting taken by, you know, hooded like so-called ICE agents, like, you know. So it's like the worst thing for you to do is just kind of like fall into like this pit of despair where you're just like, la la la, like disassociation from like things. And the best thing that you could do is, you know, get involved and talk to other people and get inspired by, you know, by the work, because, you know, when and us, those of us that have been in the work, you know, in different fronts, like it's overwhelming the amount of problems in the world. But what makes it like much more bearable and possible is when you find other people that, you know, can carry the load. And I find that in this moment, if we educate, you know, the community about the history of issues here in the city as well as nationally, and tie in and learn from the mistakes of the past, you know, and from like the things that they did right, and put it into this moment, then we can have like a real movement that could change our city, but then also just, you know, like Latinx, Black, Brown, POC, by POC kind of politics in the ways that the transformative it did in the 60s, right? Do you see that, you know, that's something that like we could do in this moment, or like what are some of the things that like you could see coming out of this? Because, you know, Trump's gonna be gone in 3 years, but the problems are not, right?
Yeah.
Democrats are gonna deport us too, you know? But, you know, they'll be nicer about it.
Yeah. I think, no, for sure we're in very fertile ground right now for the kind of organizing that needs to happen, for the kind of something a person that I really admire in the history of organizing is Kwame Ture, formerly Stokely Carmichael. And he was chairman of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was the prime minister of the Black Panther Party for a time. And he worked alongside folks like Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and the Panthers. And something that he talks about is like the importance of raising the people's consciousness. And when we talk about raising consciousness, what I understand that to mean is recognizing that things are not as they seem, right? You're told this story about why things are the way they are. You're told a story about why certain people have so much and others have so little. And as you become more conscious and understanding the material conditions of how did these people get so much? How did these people end up with so little? And who wrote these rules? Who drew these lines? You know, when you start to unpack that, like you said, it can be overwhelming. You're going to start to see a lot of cracks in the foundation of this world that you were told is fair and just and everyone gets what they deserve. And moments like this are ripe for that. Like I said, if you have a group of high school kids who are going up against police, throwing tear gas, something's going to tell you that's not right. So when you have those opportunities to raise people's consciousness, you have to push to the next level. It's not just things aren't right. It's you have a responsibility to help make things right. And so what can you do from your position, with your privilege, with your security and comfort, whatever that comfort might be? Some of us can't get involved. I know people who are undocumented who are watching from the sidelines saying, keep it up, keep it going, and we'll support how we can. There's other people, we have white allies, citizens who are saying, I'm going to put myself on the front lines because I know I can. And recognizing that responsibility that we have, that's really critical. Right now, in terms of like what does this moment offer us in terms of what we can build? I think it's giving people those avenues and showing them this is where you can take this energy. And again, it's up to you to decide where you want to take the energy. But there was a phrase I learned during 2020 during the Black Lives Matter, nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. So if you can't be going head to head with ICE agents who are trying to kidnap people, okay, maybe you can deliver groceries. Maybe you can fundraise to help, day laborers who can't pay their rent. Maybe you can walk kids to school because their parents might be a little too afraid to walk their kids to school during this time. So finding ways that we can support each other, protect each other, and build that trust and relationship within our community, because we live in a world that purposefully divides us so that we can't have that power. So finding ways to bring ourselves together, that's where I'm putting my energy right now.
I love it. I love it.
That makes sense.
No, we're almost running out of time, but I wanted to talk a little bit about perhaps like discord within the movement. Of course, we could talk at length about it, but there's, of course, as we get into this, there's people that are like Bernie people, right? I met you through the Bernie movement, and that was like what was taking root at that moment, 2020. We had all these hopes and dreams about that we're going to reform the Democratic Party, and
Good time.
Bernie's, we were so young and naive.
And then can burn out.
We were feeling the burn, and then we burned out.
We needed ointment for that burn.
They extinguished that shit. There wasn't a burnout. They were like,
nope.
nice
Yeah, it was
try.
pretty troubling, right? That Obama and other folks, from the
Everybody
status
stepped in
quo,
to say no, thank you.
like, we're gonna, everybody stepped down. Pete Buttigieg, that other white lady, like everybody stepped down and cleared the way for Biden, and of course COVID came, and that
And then Bernie handed the reins to Biden, saying, "Oh, he's gonna take care of it."
My good friend.
My
Joe
good
Biden.
friend Joe.
I know.
So there was a lot of heartbreak in that
Yeah.
saga. Yeah.
So I mean, how do you? I mean, because I think even when you were mentioning about peaceful versus non-peaceful, like some people are just strictly like it has to be peaceful, and you were kind of making the argument, like what, some of it might not be as peaceful, but there's there's a space for it all, and frankly, like if all you're doing is holding the sign on the street, that probably might not do much, but. I was gonna comment on it, and then I didn't, because I wanted to talk to you about it, I guess, in person. But I was, to me it sounded like you were saying like, just if all you're gonna do is just come out and hold a sign, then just stay home, But
What was that? I don't think I said that exactly. But where was
yeah,
that?
like I mean, you said a lot of different things. You're saying like there's peaceful. And then there's people that want to take it more, to the next level, and within that, you also said there was, if all you were gonna do was just be peaceful, then this might maybe just stay home,
Yeah. Okay. So I want to be clear too, because I always say I'm not gonna tell people to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. I've seen videos of people jumping in front of ICE vans and smashing windows, and a part of me will see that and say, maybe that's going to make a statement that this is the kind of resistance that is necessary. I'm not going to do that because I know what the consequences will be for that. And I'm not going to direct people to do that because I don't know what their situation is. But I also, again, I'm a student of people like Kwame, like Malcolm, like Martin, who advocated for nonviolence. I'm also a student of people like Howard Zinn. And when I say I'm a student, I don't mean I was in their classroom. I mean, I read, I listen to their speeches. I want to learn from what they taught. I learned about the abolition of slavery and the ways that people resisted against that. If you look up the Nat Turner Rebellion, where he led a small army of slaves to rise up and start burning down plantations and killing slave owners and their families. People might say that was uncalled for. They should have marched in the roads
They should
with
have
signs
gone through
instead.
the right channels.
When I look at John Brown, the story of John Brown, a white man who basically was on a mission to wage civil war against the government to abolish slavery. And he was captured and hanged. We have to recognize that there are certain moments in history where the injustice is so grave and so severe that the typical avenues for impacting change won't cut it. And I think Gaza was a good example of that, where people who have been fighting for 75 years in Palestine against Israeli occupation, they tried peaceful means, they tried diplomatic means, and eventually people got pushed into a wall and said, we have to take up arms, and we have to try to resist by any means. And people will say that and say that's uncalled for, you know. But history shows you sometimes that's what's necessary. South Africa, the apartheid in South Africa wasn't ended just because people were protesting about it. They had armed resistance for a good while, and they did boycotts, which impacted the economy of South Africa. And eventually, it was just too much to bear, and Nelson Mandela becomes president. You know, but Nelson Mandela was labeled a terrorist by the United States until 2008. So I think what I say when I say that is, again, I'm not going to tell people what they need to do. But I need people to understand that when you are up against the kind of oppression that we're up against around the world, it isn't fair for you to say how people should resist that oppression, especially when they are on the receiving end, when they are closest to the pain.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like it makes me think of Luigi Gioni as well. That was like, didn't see a solution through the system,
Yeah.
so we took it into his own hands. And it's kind of like, well, I mean, don't let it get this bad that people are desperate enough to do these kinds of things, right?
And
like,
seeing how he was celebrated should send a message to the people in power. And maybe things aren't okay.
yeah, I think they're going to come eat us if we let our guard down. You know, that really said a lot, actually, that the public sentiment was mostly. like,
Yeah, the people were like, they were just scrambling, like, whoa, we cannot have this, like, be okay. Like, you know, this guy's a really bad guy. It's like, wait, but like the insurance companies are really bad, and they get no like
says a
any
lot.
kind of like, you know, like accountability for their actions.
Yeah.
Same with like billionaires. If you have all the money, like look at Epstein. You know, like this dude literally got a sweetheart deal from like, you know, our government when they fully knew what he was doing to young people, and because that's what money can buy. But yeah.
Yeah, and I want to make just one more point. You know, people will point to examples like Martin Luther King and the nonviolent movement of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was significant. I think something that Kwame said about Malcolm is that Martin's greatest contribution was that he taught us how to face the enemy without fear. And that's what nonviolent confrontation does, is I can go up to a police officer with nothing in my hands and get cracked over the baton and get up and do it again. Like that's a powerful effort. But if you study that history, you have to recognize it wasn't just that. There were people who were rioting. There were people who were causing all kinds of mayhem. There was more radical versions of that liberation struggle, like the Black Panther Party, like the Black Liberation Army, who were creating these different flanks where the people in power are like, if I don't sign something into law, things are going to blow up. We got a powder keg.
Yeah,
So
it was like a good cop, bad cop kind of thing. Like you want to like, or not. Maybe that's the wrong metaphor, but it's like you like you know like you want to negotiate with me or you want to negotiate with that guy because like you know
Yeah.
like
What did Kennedy say? Those who make nonviolent revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. Like,
I mean, America should learn from its own history versus the British. You know.
yeah.
Like,
No, George Washington marched for days with the sign in his hand.
Yeah.
Red coats, go home.
no taxation with rapid representation. Like, yeah, like
Do they go through the proper channels? Yeah, that is funny.
yeah. I mean, as they said, one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter, and people throw around the word, you know, especially after 9/11, of course, you know, like, you know, it's like, and with nowadays, like, you know, with all the things that happened, of course, with Israel and with like Middle East, like who has a right to self-defense and who doesn't, who, you know, because that
Does Iran have a right to self-defense,
that breaks
or
down-
is just Israel?
yeah, it's like, oh, okay,
Just our friends.
yeah,
Just our pals.
yeah, no, but and so I guess to take into the discord about like the Democratic Party, do you believe still that that the Democratic Party is reformable?
Just no. I like the answer. You're like, I know this is a question.
no. Next question.
No, look, I'll tell you, this is a conversation that has been happening for decades, and sometimes people who are new to the movements are going through these realizations that people have made for years and years. Malcolm in the 60s said, you know, there's the conservatives, the racists who are the wolves, who show their teeth and you know what they're about. And then there's the fox who gives you a nice smile and waits for you to look away and then bites you in the neck. Yeah. And even again,
Girls.
yeah, we mentioned Corky Gonzalez talking about the parties. Same thing. He's like, they both serve the same interests, and neither of them are really for the people. Martin Luther King, when he wrote Letter in Birmingham jail, said the greatest obstacle to progress for black people is not these racist Klan members. It's the white liberal who says, I agree with your mission, but I don't agree with your methods. So I think that the Democratic Party as a whole has served as what Malcolm called like the plantation for people. And I say this as somebody who used to have a lot of faith in the Democratic Party. I've seen how they move. I've seen how they move here locally, the DPOC. I've seen how they move nationally in the ways that they crushed Bernie and in the ways that they looked away from the genocide in Gaza. All, if Kamala had come out and said, you know what, we're going to call for a ceasefire, we're going to stop sending these weapons to Israel to continue their genocide, and we're going to look for diplomatic means to this situation, and we're going to let a Palestinian person speak at the DNC, crazy idea. If they had done that, there might have been an actual opportunity to bring people in and show that the Democratic Party is open to hearing these criticisms. But similar to how we were saying here in Santana, they serve certain interests, and until those strings are cut, until we have lobbying and corruption that is driving all these politicians, until that's done away with, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party won't save anybody. That's my view.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, how about this? How about this question? If you can't save the Democrats, is it better that you have people in there causing a ruckus? Like that guy that was like saying, "Hey, we should run Dems." David Hogg. They screwed him, right? But isn't it better that that happens than we just let them do it?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been so invested in like the conversation around party politics for a while. Like I said, I've been for myself.
It's exhausting.
Yeah.
I tell you.
For me, I'm like, I got limited time. I got limited capacity. I'm a dad. I'm doing the work I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna put my
prioritize. Yeah.
But when it comes to the question of like, is the Democratic Party salvageable? Can we use it as a vehicle to put people in power that might help us move things along? Like I look to people like AOC, and I see that they have done some good, and they've been able to bring people to adopt ideas.
Like sunscreen.
Sunscreen?
That was one of her campaigns.
Oh, I don't know about that. But like they have done important work to bring people a little further along the ideological spectrum. If over here is Nazi, Klans member, conservative, ultranationalist,
average American.
Yeah, and over here is like sweaty anarchists who want to burn everything down.
Yeah.
And, like I'd say the majority of Americans fall somewhere along this side of the spectrum. And then Bernie's over here.
Yeah, he's right on the edge.
And people are like, whoa, take it easy, Bernie. What?
That heat.
Livable wage? Get out of here.
Yeah.
And so if we're able to pull people closer, if we're able to normalize that conversation, move what's known as the Overton window over here, that's a positive.
Yeah.
If we are convincing people that this is where it's at, I think we're falling short. And again, we're running the risk of just bringing people into another plantation with new parameters, with new limits.
Yeah.
We can say this, we can't say that. We can't do this, we can do that.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's still people who are pulling the strings, deciding what the conversation is.
Yeah, it's a double-edged kind of situation.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's tough. There's something to be said about the inside-outside game, but as somebody that works within the Democratic Party sphere, like it sucks. Doesn't make one feel empowered. Like the last convention, people were like dropping f-bombs. I was like, ooh, careful, Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Like
Spicy.
Yeah. Oh, sassy. I need a little more than performative words. I need like or provocative words. I need provocative actions, transformative actions, that can change things, in a substantial way. But when we have Democrats in charge of the state, what do? They give subsidies to oil companies. They don't give us Medicare for all because Gavin Newsom, can't grow a spine, and he's in the pockets of, the health insurance companies, and you go down the list and so on. It's just like, okay, well, yeah, things are, Democrats, again, Obama deported so many people and things were bad and stuff, but now the Democrats, his only play is like, we're not Trump, we're the good guys, we'll defend you. But did you though? When you had the chance? Are you in the state?
If I can give you another example, so a very significant figure here in local politics is Lou Correa, Congressmember Lou Correa.
Oh yeah, you're gonna get that.
So the first time
Get him started.
The first time I met Lou was actually when I was organizing with the Sunrise Movement. We were trying to get Congress members to endorse the Green New Deal, which was, in a nutshell, moving away from our dependence on fossil fuels, which are ultimately going to drive us to climate catastrophe, which my kid is going to have to deal with, the students I was teaching are going to have to deal with, which some people today are already dealing with. And we were trying to get politicians who would sign on to support the Green New Deal and to commit to a no fossil fuel money pledge, because we know how money moves politicians. So we want to know that if you're going to be voting on an issue around fossil fuels and climate change, we want to know that you aren't bought off. And we would talk to Lou at his town halls, And he was like, I can't do it. I don't do pledges, and I got to look out for jobs in my community, so I ain't touching that. And so for me, the science has been clear for decades on what climate change is going to do. And so if you're a politician claiming to serve the people and claiming to have integrity, but you're unwilling to take that stance because you need those dollars and because you feel that that constituency of people who are dependent on the fossil fuel industry are more important than the well-being of our planet. Okay, that's a sign. He does do some positive things. I've seen him bring money to the community. I see him bring funding to schools. He speaks out when it comes to issues on immigration like he's doing right now.
He put out that fire on the freeway that one time. He pulled over the hose. He
Yeah, it's
really
like,
did that. So
again,
knock it.
again, I don't hate anybody and I'm not demonizing anybody, but I'm going to call you out on where you fall short. And the other area where he fell short was during the genocide in Gaza, where anybody and their mama can see this is not okay. If Miss Rachel, who's making videos for kids,
Yeah, she.
can say this ain't okay,
Yeah.
why can't a Congress member who is a descendant of colonized people, who understands what this is on the ground, why can't he speak out on that? And knowing that he's in bed with the Israel lobby, he's got basically associations that won't let him touch that issue.
Yeah.
So in that regard, that's where I look at party politics and Democratic Party in particular as a vehicle for certain issues, but as a significant barrier for other issues that ultimately are going to be having a much broader impact.
Yeah, it's gonna be like a little Trojan horse there. You think you're gonna?
Yeah, they can talk about abortion. They can't talk about a living wage. They can't talk about universal health care. They can't talk about a lot of things.
Yeah, no, it's tough out here in these streets. That's why we need folks like you and other folks that are just the party politics. Like it's not doing anything for me. Like we need to organize outside of it. Those of us that are trying to reform or even run candidates that are not necessarily Democrats, but like are independents. I mean, I think about Carolyn Torres. Like she was trying to get the Democratic Party's endorsement locally. She didn't get it. David Benavides, former council member, ran and with the endorsement and everybody's endorsements, like all the unions and everybody, Carolyn like beat him hard. That's actually one of the reasons why Valerie, started hating a lot of us because we were all friends before, but we supported, not her person, and then everything else that folks can look at past Santa Ana Unified School District meetings and seeing the toxic behavior that started there against her council colleagues there or board colleagues that when she got elected to be the mayor, I'm like, I've seen what she was there, and so it just translated, and it's the same thing here. But hopefully we have a turning point in our city where we're able to actually get some some things passed or some legislation supported. But I don't feel too hopeful, but at the same time, we did get rent control, so that was great. And so for as much as I don't agree with Ty on a lot of things, for me as somebody that fought for rent control for years, to have her vote for that, that's something you got to work with. And, with the people in power that happen to be Democrats, I used to screw everybody. I hate you all, but I can't burn all the bridges, Avelino and something sometimes we need them to hear us out. And on some issues we can work with each other and other times we won't. But that comes with I don't know, being mature and stuff.
I think you can. Yeah, I think you can collaborate. I think you can work alongside people. I just don't agree with having allegiances to a party.
100%. I don't drink nobody's Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
I'm a free agent when it comes to that. Even with Bernie, people he's above critique. Nobody is. Neither is AOC, and so but we gotta try something. And I think what last thing on this point is when Bernie said sometimes we need to run independents, outside of the Democratic Party and win. So if he could do that, and Zoran Matmani in New York is a prime example, former chief of staff, I believe, for AOC. He could, if he wins or he places top two with a strong showing, he could take out Cuomo and people that supported Trump and the APAC and all the establishment people that are fully behind Governor Cuomo, even with all of his horrible shit. Maybe we have the ability in this country to dream better and get the leadership that we need. But we'll see what New York decides. I feel it's going to be like a bellwether for for next year's primaries. We'll see what happens locally with the assembly races here with some of our friends, and we'll see what happens with the mayor in the next election cycle too, if she's able to survive.
If she resigns first,
I don't think she ain't gonna do that.
Not likely.
She's too
likely.
She's too
Right.
proud. She's too proud to do that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, man. So we got through so much stuff, you know, and I would definitely shout out to Latinx Parenting. Like
Yeah,
you said, your partner.
Leslie's great.
You know, we're trying to
Love
get
me
her
more.
on too. Yeah, it's like love her.
Yeah.
But you know, unfortunately, she had a commitment. But love to have her on as well. You know, and to share, you know, this aspect of educating young, you know, people and
Yeah.
and kids and being able to have empowered, conscious, you know, like next generation
Yeah.
people and decolonize ourselves and our old habits of how we would educate our children
Yeah,
because of what we went through.
Yeah, if I could just share a little bit about her work. Like,
Yeah.
initially when we met, I was just focused on the political work, the organizing work, the education on the, history and things. And she really introduced me to what we call like the heart space, the healing space. Again, we were talking about some of the lateral violence that we have in the organizing community. A lot of that comes from the lack of knowing how to resolve conflicts, how to communicate with each other, how to resolve when there is friction in these spaces, how to really just recognize that we are ultimately connected, and if we can commit to protecting that connection and work towards maintaining that connection, that's what's going to ultimately strengthen us. So her work is, incredibly powerful for this space. People say Latinx parenting. Number one, people take issue with the word Latinx. Deal with it. Go, go read about it. And then the parenting part, people will say, "Oh, this is just for parents and families." No, it's for everybody. It's for everybody.
Yeah, I parent myself now.
Yeah, you're self-parenting.
And I fail a lot.
Yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
you gotta stop drinking.
Yeah,
Like,
man.
Yeah,
you're grounded.
she'd call that the inner child work and the inner parent work.
Yeah.
Like you got to recognize the healing that you need to do and be that person who can help you through that at the same time.
I love it. And part of like here and being able to do this is how art can heal us. Like we had like Ben and using art with his students and stuff. So healing comes in all different ways. Talking about it, but drawing, singing about it, dancing, and so I think we're going to need a lot of that as we're organizing and fighting and doing all these things.
Yeah.
We also have to find a space to have, these kind of conversations, that sometimes when you're in the thick of things, you don't get to do a chance to do it, but also engage in the art of healing, which is, I think, the art of dialogue and communication, like positive, mature, uplifted conversation.
Yeah, just to bring all that in. So Leslie and I, we're forming a collective. It's informal right now. There's no like LLC or 501c3, but whenever we host our teach-ins or we have community events, we do it under the umbrella of Sana Sana Santana, and so that's our little baby. But it includes that we want to have the political education space, which I bring, the organizing space, which I bring, but also the healing space, which she brings, the celebration space, the art space, which we can all bring, and then also the mutual aid component, so that we can help people address whatever immediate needs they have. Now, we're not here to do all that, but we want to invite people who can support us in bringing all that.
Yeah.
So right now, again, we're focusing on the education, the organizing, and the healing work, but hopefully we can, bring people in to do the arts and the celebration and the mutual aid so that we can really build this out.
Heck yeah.
Oh, yeah.
All right. And on that note, so thank you so much for everybody that tuned in and watched us for the first time. Please
Live.
like, follow, share this video. Just want to get, this amazing work, by Fernando and all the different orgs and groups that, were mentioned. Because, the work is not done and not by a long shot. We're in it for the long haul. And so as long as we're continuing to educate each other and build those networks of, solidarity and service, and work, then I think we're gonna,
We'll be all right.
We're gonna be all right.
Yeah.
I think we're gonna be all right.
We're gonna make it happen.
As long as we don't end up in World War III, I think we're gonna.
Yeah.
If we don't destroy each other, we'll get along domestically. Hopefully.
If not, we're building some bunkers, baby.
And maybe we can end with a couple calling out of things people can do, because I think that's important. I just got some notice, Clue has some volunteer opportunities, like courtroom observation, individual accompaniment, like what ICE is picking up people when they go to their court appointments and things. And to have someone there to witness that and that can document that is a powerful thing. So
Yeah.
Clue has several ways people can get involved. I know there's rapid response.
Yeah, like you mentioned, patrols, for folks, that are driving around places where ICE has been spotted, making sure, that we're there, to, at the very least, videotape and, and perhaps, more. But, I think there's a space, like you mentioned, for everybody, the food distributions and things of that nature. we can definitely do that and keep coming to South City Council. As Fernando, was able to, help, inspire a lot of people, and we need that so much more because these people things can happen in front of empty chambers, and these decisions that are changing are affecting our lives on the daily, and all the time are happening, and people aren't there to speak against it or for the things that we need. So. Cool. Well, Fernando, where can people find y'all at? What's your handle and all that?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. That's primarily where I share my stuff at Fernando.Deveras. And you can also find Leslie, my partner, at Latinx Parenting, all one word, or her personal, Leslie Priscilla. And then you can also find our baby, Sana Sana Santana, online, where we'll share any updates on events and things that we're having in the community. And yeah, that's it.
Nice.
Cool. All right. So thank you. And with that, I want to thank audio video engineer Edgar Silva, Iron Lion Media. Yeah, holding it down for so many years now. So appreciate you and all the work that you do. And shout out to Jackie. She's
Jackie,
his partner. For sacrificing him to be here with us. So and the beautiful little babies you got. Yeah. Shout out to Ruben for helping us here with the camera work and all this stuff, and just being an awesome, beautiful person, and being out here. We had an amazing drag brunch at El Indio this past Sunday, where we were able to raise over 1,000 funds for Orange County Rapid Response Network. He was there with his family, and we were there, and it was great. It was fabulous. Woo! And Moy for helping us with our new song. So and Lover Sonicos.
New song every episode, guys.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you have to come up with a new song.
Tune in next
week. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. So yeah, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good.
Yeah.
I'm good. The world didn't end. I was worried that the world would end before the show happened. You know what I mean?
That happens sometimes.
And at least we're underground, so that keeps us a little bit safe.
Yeah, maybe a bunker buster could get through here.
Maybe
through the Grand Central. But I don't know. The bones on this building are pretty strong. So yeah, I'm feeling good.
Good, brother.
Yeah,
good. It's good seeing you, and good being able to have our first live show in many months, years.
Yes, many moves.
And again, thanks again to Fernando Deveras for all the work that you do and for being on the show. So from Dylan Thompson and Jose Gloria and all of us here on It's Happening, we are signing off.
It's happening! And Moises wrote a second. There's a second.